Well, I do think we are ready. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And again, welcome everybody. My name is Erin Reed. I'm the marketing lead for Polaris MEP, and it is my privilege to work with a great team, several of whom are on here today, and to help let manufacturers in Rhode Island know who Polaris MEP is, what the MEP National Network is, and how it can help them with their businesses. And so for those of you who haven't yet worked with us, our sole mission is to help smaller manufacturers in Rhode Island improve, grow, learn, increase profitability, hire and retain talent. And how we achieve that goal is by really trying to serve as your one-stop shop for connections, resources, customized solutions. We do that both in Rhode Island and across that MEP national network, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Network. So it's one thing to say that we have an impact on our clients' companies and their bottom lines or top lines, but we actually measure impact. And yes, you can kind of hear where the theme is going for today. We measure our customer satisfaction, and measure the impact. And in fiscal year 2022, those customer satisfaction surveys, those customer impact surveys, showed us that we helped to achieve these results that you see on this slide. 96.9 million in increase in retained sales, nearly 1,000 jobs added and retained. And it is our privilege to be able to partner with our clients to get that going through. Now, projects at Polaris MEP are managed and guided by manufacturing advisors who have years of experience. They've been where you are today. They face the challenges you have, and they've learned some great solutions and techniques that can help you achieve your goals. And so that includes, of course, today's presenter, Chris Cinieri. So Chris at Polaris MEP is a project manager. He actually leads our quality management programs for clients, and his vast experience in manufacturing helps him really see a whole business and see all the different ways that something that is in quality can impact these other areas as well. So it's my privilege to turn it over to Chris right now and talk about measuring customer satisfaction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We're so happy to have you on this webinar. I know the weather is gorgeous. We made mention of that. So I appreciate your time joining us. And we started to send out the ad for this webinar a few weeks ago, and we started to get people signing up, and we asked the question, how are you currently measuring customer satisfaction? And the answers were vast. And we're going to take a look at a slide later that shows a graph outlining some of the answers that we got from both the folks who signed up from this webinar, as well as another poll that we ran. And the information is quite telling, so it is good to see people here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris. I've worked in manufacturing here in Rhode Island for over 20 years before joining the Polaris MEP team. I'm currently working as a manufacturing advisor, and I like to help our clients in all manners of quality management systems, as well as leadership training. But today we're going to be talking about a topic that, in my experience, is often overlooked in many organizations, yet you can yield probably the most actionable and insightful information when you harvest this information properly, and that's customer feedback. So my goal is to leave some time at the end for any questions, comments. However, please feel free to use the chat function if there's something you'd like to know more about. My contact information will also be at the end for anything I can help with. And you're also going to receive a link through an email after with, you guessed it, just like Erin mentioned, our customer satisfaction survey. So we like to do that after every presentation and every training that we perform. It helps us to see what works, it helps us to see what didn't work, and it helps us to improve moving forward. So I greatly appreciate your time in taking that for us. So customer satisfaction, no news does not necessarily equal good news. And we're going to talk about that. When you receive that email from us with a link, there will be a feedback form that you can fill out, and also an opportunity to receive the slides and the recording of today's webinar as well. So you'll get a copy of those if you would like. So we would appreciate that again. So let's begin. And I'd like to start with a disclaimer. We're going to be mentioning certain quality standards such as ISO today, but you absolutely do not need to be certified to an ISO standard to benefit from the discussion today. Okay. So I do a fair amount of auditing, And I have found in my experience that many companies have a firm grasp on some of the sections of a quality standard, such as ISO 9001, and sometimes they have a weaker grasp of other sections. So for example, whenever I audit, let's say a machine shop, I usually find that they have a strong calibration program because after all, measurement is their business. So yeah, we might find a gauge without a sticker, or we might find a sticker that's past due, but by and large, they have a solid calibration program in place. Other areas of the standard are sometimes an afterthought for some companies. And these are things like interested parties and organizational knowledge and customer satisfaction. So a lot of times when I get onto auditing customer satisfaction, I find that there's very little evidence as to what's being done, just enough to satisfy the audit, but definitely not enough to be actionable for the company. So again, if you're not currently ISO certified, bear with me. We're going to talk a little bit about what's required for those companies who are, just so you can get a flavor of what they have to do to be certified. So let's take a look at the most ubiquitous quality management system, ISO 9001. I know several of you on the call today are certified to this standard. So the organization shall monitor customers' perceptions of the degree to which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. So we have a shall there. So we know we have to do something. And it goes on to give a note of some examples. Monitoring customer perceptions can include surveys, which a lot of you mentioned. It can be customer feedback on delivered products. It can be meetings with customers. It can be market share analysis, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'll point out, because people are always quick to point this out to me, it does not say shall retain documented information, which is ISO speak for you should have something written down somewhere. However, management review minutes require a discussion about customer satisfaction. It's one of the inputs into your management review, and those shall be retained as documented information. So even though ISO 9001 does not specifically say you shall retain documented information here, there are other parts in the standard where an auditor can reasonably expect to see a discussion related to customer satisfaction monitoring. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now. You don't just want to look at this and say, oh, good, I'm off the hook. I don't have to write anything down. I don't have to keep anything. I can just do this quickly and we'll move on. So that's 9001, very simple, very high level. For those on the call who may operate in the aerospace industry, maybe you're certified to AS9100. AS9100, when it talks about measuring customer satisfaction, takes everything from ISO 9001 and it adds some specific information that it wants you to collect. So it says, shall include, but not limited to, product and service conformity, on-time delivery performance, customer complaints and corrective action requests. So we know right away that there are certain areas that we need to be polling our customers about. So if you've ever taken a survey and you've seen a question along the lines of, how well did our product meet your needs, 1 to 5, or whatever the case is, they're trying to ascertain product or service conformity. And similarly with on-time delivery performance, you may see questions like, how would you rate our on-time delivery, 1 to 5, or whatever the case is. And that's a requirement under AS9100. Now, for those of you who might operate in the medical device arena, and you might be certified to ISO 13485, well, this goes a little bit more in depth than the prior two. And the main difference is that ISO 13485 requires you to document how you will obtain and use this information, as well as the procedures for the process. So here we're going to have a lot more documentation. Okay, we're going to have to describe how we go about getting this information from our customers, what's the procedure for the process, and we have to show evidence that we've gone through and done this. Okay, so a little bit more strict than the prior two standards. So for those of you who aren't certified to a quality standard, it gives you a little bit of an idea of what's being asked, at least in terms of customer satisfaction. And that's what these other companies are having to come up with. But as I said before, when I do a lot of auditing, sometimes these areas can be a little weak, and that's what we want to talk about today. So here's a typical customer satisfaction survey. Okay. In my experience, the discussion around customer satisfaction usually goes something like this. Okay, and you can tell me if it's more or less the same for you. I'll ask a client, are you currently measuring customer satisfaction? And they'll say, oh, yes. So I say, great. How do you go about doing that? And they say, here we go, a survey. I say, okay, great. That's excellent. Can we look at the survey? Now, here's where it gets interesting. I'll ask the question, how often do you send this survey? And most of the time they tell me annually. Okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It certainly satisfies a quality standard. A little bit of a stretch maybe, but they're doing it. Okay, even more interesting. I'll ask the question, who gets the survey? And in most cases, it's some subset of our customers. Not all of our customers, some subset. It could be the top 5% by revenue or by volume, or it could be the top something in a certain category, or however they delineate it. It's some subset of our customers. So last year I read a book. It was an autobiography of Lou Gerstner Jr., who was a former CEO of IBM. And some of you on the call may remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, IBM was actually in danger of being split into smaller companies and sold off piece by piece because they simply weren't profitable. So they brought Lou Gerstner in as a turnaround CEO. He came from RJR Nabisco. And this is part of what he found. So I'm going to read you this quote. This comes right from his book. The way we measured customer satisfaction was to ask our sales force to pick some of their customers and ask them to complete a survey. IBM does not hire dumb salespeople. They picked their best customers, and we were getting lots of positive data and absolutely fooling ourselves every day. And this quote is where it clicked for me. This is where I realized that, not in all cases, but in many of the cases that I audit, this is exactly what I see. We're sending to a subset of our customers a survey to customers whom we know will give us positive remarks. And then we file those away and we show them at audit time and we move on. Right? So maybe it's a company that we enjoy a good relationship with the buyer. Maybe the buyer got some Red Sox tickets this year. Maybe they got some Patriots tickets this year. I don't know. But all I'm saying is it's usually selected so that it comes out favorable. And just to prove this point, looking back at all of my time auditing, I've never come across a survey with poor marks. So there's something to be said there. Now, you may do surveys. Many of you who signed up for today did in fact list that you use surveys to measure customer satisfaction, and surveys are wonderful tools. In fact, they can be very powerful tools. But in reality, companies are handling customer feedback far more often through other means, such as emails and phone calls and meetings and supplier corrective action requests for any of you who may have fielded one or more of those in the past. The issue is that with the exception of supplier corrective action requests, the other data, such as emails and phone calls that we're taking day in and day out, usually isn't tabulated into something meaningful and used for trending. In other words, think about if you've taken a phone call from an irate customer because delivery is late or because something showed up incorrectly. Do you capture that information somewhere? Now, some of you may say, yes, we have a formal system and we log it, and that's great. And some of you may say, nope, we jump on it, we make it right for the customer, And once we've made it right, we move on. And then you lose that history, you lose that ability to trend. So we're getting customer feedback each and every day in our business. It's just that we may not have a system set up to capture it and to use it meaningfully. So for those companies, the surveys that they send out are what is often used for trend analysis. And like we just established, the surveys are usually very well. So what does a good system then look like for capturing and reporting customer feedback? Well, I'm going to ask a question here. This is a rhetorical question for everybody on the call. Why are you in business? More specifically, what are you in business to do? And every time I ask this question to a group, I get all kinds of different answers. And there's usually one in the bunch who will say, maximize shareholder wealth, right? From our good friend, shareholder primacy for the last 50 years. But that's not what I'm talking about here. You are in business to solve your customers' problems. Okay, more specifically, the products and services that you offer solve some business challenge that your customer has. So think about what it is that you do, you produce, I don't care what it is. You're solving some challenge that your end user has, and through buying your product or your service, they're able to overcome that challenge. So now let me ask a question. Are business challenges always static, or do they change? Well, if we look at what Peter Drucker told us, Peter Drucker famously said, innovate or die. Companies have historically applied this wisdom when addressing competition, but not customers. So in other words, we need to innovate because our competition is innovating, and therefore if we don't, we're going to get left behind. But the same is true of your customers. Your customers are innovating as well. And that part or that service that you provide to them today may be obsolete tomorrow. It may no longer satisfy their needs tomorrow or the day after or at some point in the future, in which case they may go and find another solution that satisfies their needs. So it's very important that we're on top of communicating with the customers, understanding their needs and their changes so that we can continue to meet their business challenges. Let me put it this way. Customers rarely leave us because it took 2 phone calls or 2 emails to get a response. Okay. They rarely leave us because something arrived 2 days later than we said it would arrive. Surely those are annoying. And if they become often, it could lead to a customer looking elsewhere. But if your product or service no longer solves their business challenge, then they have no other alternative but to find another solution. So it's very important that we're proactive in seeking customer feedback, not only about how's everything we're delivering today, but what are some of those changes and some of those challenges that you face out on the horizon that we might need to be aware of today. So I know that I'm going to take a little bit of heat here if there's anybody on the call who happens to be in sales. And I know that my survey at the end is going to be reflected poorly, but allow me this little bit of whimsy. Most sales teams will tell you we're in constant contact with our customers. We are always aware of what their thoughts are and what's going through their mind. And that's true. I'm not going to say it's not. But what I'd like to point out to folks on the call, especially folks who aren't in the sales department, folks who are in production, folks who are in quality, folks who are in engineering, a lot of times the sales team is in talks with the buyer or the purchasing manager or whomever it is to whom they are selling. The purchasing manager or the buyer has an office somewhere, and somebody will bring them the receipts to their desk and they'll receive it into QuickBooks or an ERP system, okay? And they'll know if it was late or not. But all in all, that's really all they know about the entire transaction. Did we receive it? Was it correct? Okay. They don't know the experience of the receiver on the receiving dock, who every time they open your box has to sort everything out because you pack it poorly and it doesn't survive shipment. They don't talk to the person who installs that part into the final assembly, who says, I always have burrs that I have to go to the shop and take care of before I install it. Okay, maybe it's not enough for me to call the customer directly, but it's something I have to deal with. So the buyer and the purchaser never see those little instances that build up over time. So their feedback to your sales team will be, oh yeah, everything is good. We got it on time. Everything's all right. But we want to know, who are the people using the product? Okay. And I'm going to give you an example here in the restaurant industry. So I have a friend who owns a restaurant in Providence, and he tells me all the time, in the restaurant industry, your best customers are the ones who complain. And here's why. Because for every customer who complains, there are 10 others who had the same or similar experience and did not complain. And not only did not complain, but they're going to tell their friends and family not to go. And with the advent of this thing called social media, they can tell a whole lot of people not to go with very little effort. So a restaurant owner would much rather be made aware of a situation that they're unaware of, so that they can correct it before all of these other people experience it and they lose business. So that's how we want to think. A lot of times when I work with sales teams, I'll ask the question, have you ever had a customer, a longtime customer who orders repeatedly? You can almost count on that order coming in. And then one day it just stops. You don't see that PO again. Some time goes by, no PO. Okay, has that ever happened to you? And they'll say, yeah, it happens all the time. Well, that's because something's changed and we didn't know about it. And they're one of those people who didn't tell us, right? Because it's unfair for us to put the onus on the customer to let us know when something is wrong. Like my slide at the beginning that said, no news does not equal good news. We have to be proactive, and we have to be proactive with the right folks at the customer. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, when we had folks sign up to attend this webinar today, we asked, what are some of the ways that you currently collect customer satisfaction info? And we'd also sent out a 2-question poll last fall to some area manufacturers. We got 52 responses. And what you see on the screen are the results of the question, how does your company currently measure customer satisfaction? So is there anything on this chart that stands out to anyone? There's one particular area that I'm looking at. I'm looking at the one that says we don't. 20%, in fact, came back and said, we don't survey our customers. We don't actively pursue or seek customer feedback information. That's a lot. That's a lot in my mind. You know, emails by far the predominant method, and that's absolutely fine. Surveys next, meetings, it might be where we go on site, or we'll have an online virtual meeting. Okay, we have phone calls, but that number of we don't kind of solidified what I've seen in my own experience in auditing in quality management systems. Okay, so it's a significant number. Those companies most likely might be operating on the no news is good news, or, you know, if something's wrong, we'll hear about it. But you don't want to rely on that. Right? You want to be a little bit more proactive. When it comes to emails, a lot of times I'll recommend to people, it can be a simple solution as creating folders within your Outlook. And it could be very high level. It could be called compliments and one called complaints. And you just kick off a copy of emails, you know, as they come in. One's a compliment, one's a complaint. And then when audit time comes around and your auditor asks you, hi, how many complaints have you had since the last audit? Or how many compliments have you received since your last audit? you can just open up that folder and count them up, and you have that information, right? So sometimes I think companies think it's a big dollar investment in some fancy software to achieve this, but really we'll talk a little bit about how we can achieve it for some very low cost, if not free alternatives. Other question that we asked, for those of you receiving customer feedback, how is it currently being used in your company? And this was part of the poll that we had sent out in the fall. And for most folks, over 80% said for product and service improvement. So we get ideas, we get suggestions, we get, all of this information, and we use it to go back and do an engineering change or some other thing that can help improve either the product itself or the service behind it, etc. The next highest was process improvement. So maybe our lead times, maybe people are complaining about our lead times. And we think, wow, we have a lot of wasted time in our process. And if we could just get that time down, we could tighten up our lead times and become more competitive. So we're going to call Polaris MEP to come in and help us with some lean transformation initiatives. See what I did there? Also, pricing considerations, new products and services, and then there are some people who listed none of the above. So you can see some of the ways that people are using the information that they're getting, which is good. So now, with all of that said, what does a formal customer measurement and management system look like? Well, here's an example on the screen that you can take and modify to suit your needs. By no means do you have to follow this exactly, but you can take it, see what works for you, and we'll talk through a little bit about each of these steps. So we want to identify the purpose, which is, hopefully you'll say we're solving our customers' problems or their challenges. We want to build the lens of the customer, which we'll talk about. We want to build the survey, because there is a difference between a good and a bad survey. We want to go from data to information. And on the surface, those might look like the same word. But data is just the raw data that a survey program dumps into a spreadsheet, nice for us. We have to then take and make that actionable. We have to make sense of it. And then we have to go from information to decisions. So in other words, we've captured all of this. What do we do with it? Right? We can't just sit on it. It's incumbent upon us to act on it. So we want to identify the purpose. Identifying the purpose may already be completed at your company, or maybe the company needs to take a step back and revisit why this is important. Are you looking to increase revenue or your customer count, your book of sales? Are you looking to have a better quote to close ratio? What are some of the areas that you struggle with internally that we might be able to get some feedback that can help us with? Are you seeking additional inputs into your own continual improvement programs? Are you seeking a competitive advantage? Is there an area in the market that our company can dominate based on our current capabilities, capacities, etc.? So why is it important to us? So we really have to come together and figure out, what do we want to get from this information? Otherwise, we're just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. After that, we want to build the lens of the customer. For those of you who are working in quality right now, or have a background in quality, you might remember the old House of Quality or Quality Function Deployment tool. I'm not going to go into it specifically. You can look it up. It's a great way to identify the needs of the customer and pair it up with our strengths and our capabilities. But you can certainly leverage other quality tools as well. So there's a lot of different ways you might be able to achieve this in-house. You can gather input from customers. A lot of times you'll hear this referred to as a focus group, where we'll get together with, this is the good time to get together with those friendly customers that we have good relationships with, because we want them to be honest with us. So we can get some input from them. And we want to know, what do they think of us, not what we think of ourselves. What does the customer think of us, not what do we think of ourselves? So oftentimes there's a difference, and we want to know what that chasm is. so that we can start to put together a program to overcome it. So always make sure when you get to this next step, you want to seek what does the customer currently think of us, not what do we think of ourselves. When it comes time to build the survey, and I said earlier, surveys are a wonderful and a powerful tool. There are plenty of resources online for building a survey in terms of the types of questions to ask, the types of scales to use, etc. So I'm not going to beleaguer them here. You can do a simple search and come up with a lot of great information. A few points, though, that I'd like you to keep in mind. The survey should be what the customer wants us to know, not just what we want to know. So what are some of those things? Again, think of the example of the buyer filling out a survey who says, yeah, it always arrives on time and I don't hear anything bad, so it's good. If we gave that same survey to the operator or the machinist or the person on the floor who's installing this part, what might they want us to know? So you want to think, what the customer wants us to know in addition to what do we want to know? You want to decide what market segments or populations do we want to go after? Because let's be honest, some of us, we might have a book of sales of 20 customers. Some of us might have thousands. And it's not necessarily going to be feasible to do all of those many thousands. So you will have to sample. So think about what market segments, populations are important to us. What's the data collection method? Okay, is it going to be electronic? Are we sending postcards? I still work with some companies who use postcards. They include a postcard in the box, and they're expecting the person to take the time to get a pen, fill it out, go get a stamp, right? Because they're too cheap to do pre-sorted. Go and find a mailbox and mail it back to us. Well, that's unlikely to happen. So we want to utilize technology wherever possible to make it simple. How about a QR code on the packing slip? Right? Everybody's got to match the packing slip up against their company's PO. They've got it in their hand. Put a QR code on there. How did we do? Answer this 3, 4, 5 question short survey. Right? Then once we have the data, we have to make sense of the data. A few weeks ago, I was reading an article about a hotel chain, a very high-end, very expensive hotel chain in the United States. And the article didn't say who, but a very high-end, very expensive hotel chain who has untold hundreds of online user reviews. And they hired a company to come in and go through all of that information. And what they found was greater than 40% of those user reviews were by people who never stayed at the hotel. They never stayed a single night, never even set foot inside the hotel, but they were glowing reviews. And what this company found was the reviews were being left by Uber and taxi drivers who pick up and drop off people at these hotels. And these clientele tend to tip very well. So the Uber and taxi drivers all go online and say, this is a wonderful hotel chain and I love working here and blah, blah, blah. And that's what they found when they dug a little bit deeper and didn't just look at the average score out of 5 stars, actually reading through these. So we want to look at more than just the overall trend. We want to gather the attributes and the benefits noted from the lens of the customer. And that'll help us take that data, which is that spreadsheet or however your survey program presents it to you, and allows us to have some meaning come from it. And if you choose to, another level you could add is statistical methods to provide meaningful impacts. I'm not going to go in depth into that here. Again, you can look that up separately. But statistical methods just kind of help us to really identify if this is a trend or if it's simply, an anomaly or something that's out of sorts. So we've got the data. We've got to make some sense out of it. And then we have to go from information to decisions. Okay, we can't let it sit there. So I put a line here. Think substance, not dashboards. One of my greatest pet peeves is when I see companies do a really great job of collecting all this information, and they don't do anything with it. So I visit a lot of companies, and I have seen companies who have these great big monitors on the plant floor. They might have a bank of 4 or 6, really big 48-inch, whatever monitors, and they all have these really cute charts and graphs on them. And it's impressive until I start asking everybody on the floor, what does that tell us? What is this information telling us? And a lot of times they'll tell me, I don't know. I have no idea. It's just there, right? And that tells me that we're putting that up there more to impress visitors and clients and, other folks who may be coming to our facility, more so than we're using it to make actionable decisions. So be careful. Once you start getting in good information, you want to think, how can we use it? How can we make meaningful decisions from it? Competition increases over time. So timely decision-making is imperative. You may have heard of leading versus lagging indicators. Some indicators, some of our metrics that we use are naturally leading versus lagging. However, our ability to make decisions faster than the competition is a competitive advantage. So if you're sitting there right now and thinking, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the financial leverage, we don't have the knowledge base to be that competitive leader in our industry, I'm telling you today, April 13th, forget all of that. If your company can react faster than the competition, you're going to come out ahead. If you can solve your customers' problems faster than that of your competitor, you will come out ahead. I don't care what resources they have. Okay. And then disseminate the information throughout the organization in a meaningful manner. So to go back to my example of the monitors in the plant with the pretty dashboards, okay, we're trying to relay some information to our workforce, but it's not being understood. So let's actively talk to and have those internal communications as well, so that our team knows this is what we're collecting, this is why we're collecting it, this is how it can help you in doing your job. And then present it in a way that makes sense to them and helps them to do their job, which in turn makes us better, makes us faster, gives us that competitive advantage that we've been seeking all along. So hopefully that makes sense. We want to identify, why are we doing this? What are some of the areas? And just some tips there that you can look at. If you do any kind of P&L analysis as a company, you can look at the income statement and say, where are our costs not where we were expecting them to be? Where are we over budget this period that came as a surprise? Right? And those might be some areas that point you towards some metrics or some information that you want to go and collect, not just internally, but externally. Build the lens of the customer. What does the customer want us to know? Not just what do we want to know. Move from data to information, right? Take that raw data and make some meaning out of it, and then go from information to decisions, which can help us to gain that competitive advantage. Those are kind of the steps. Like I said, feel free to walk away, modify those, help them suit your business. I'm going to leave you with this quote, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, etc. At the end of the day, a successful, focused enterprise is one that has developed a deep understanding of its customer needs, its competitive environment, and its economic realities. And again, Lou Gerstner Jr. And if anyone's interested in the book's name is Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? Excellent book. If you enjoy reading, I recommend it. I truly, truly appreciate your attendance today. Love to know if anyone has any questions, if any of this was particularly helpful. Do you have any particularly successful method of capturing feedback? How are you using it within your organization? I'm going to open this up for any questions or comments you might have. And I'm also going to put my contact information on the screen. If you would like to talk more, if there's something we can help you do to build this system, to gain some benefits from it, or if you're capturing the information and you're not sure what the next steps are, please feel free to reach out and give us a call. We're more than happy to come in and have that conversation with you. So with that, I'd like to open up
So Chris, I'm personally giggling at the idea of elephants dancing. I've got kind of a Fantasia imagination happening right now as they've been going along. Question I got was from one of the folks who messaged me, and they said, we're a really small team. How much time does it take to set up customer surveys?
So you set up the survey. Here's where the benefit of technology can help you. Once you've done the initial research into what do we want to know, and you've read online, some of those helpful resources I mentioned, how should we write the question, et cetera. Once you have your questions and your survey built, you can really automate that task in terms of sending it out to folks, in terms of collecting the data, in terms of having the solution collated and present you with reports that make sense. And that can all be done free with a service such as SurveyMonkey. Or you may have something that you pay for through a software as a service provider. So again, don't let cost get in the way of that. But once you do the initial work of building it, it can be automated from there on out.
Thank you. So Marianne wrote that she thought this was very helpful and she's excited to dig in and start collecting customer feedback. So thank you, Marianne. So one question that also came through was when you talked about the House of Quality tool earlier, is that something that's available, comes through coaching? Seems to be some questions about the House of Quality tool that you mentioned.
House of Quality, or more formally called Quality Function Deployment. I prefer House of Quality, it's a little bit easier. It is a quality tool. It's one of the many quality tools available that will peer your current capabilities, your current processes, your current service and product requirements with the needs of the customer in a matrix form. And it'll show you where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. So if a customer wants a particular valve that can hold a particular pressure, and you can't hold that pressure currently with your production techniques, you'll see that on this matrix. And that'll be an input into what do we need to focus resources on? Well, our customers are asking for this requirement. We don't currently have the means to do so. We need to invest here. So once you have that customer data, what's important to the customer, you can create one of these matrices, and it's going to tell you where you need to go and invest resources in, whether it's dollars, equipment, et cetera. And that's something that we can help you with. So please, if you have any more interest in learning about it, I say that because if you go and Google it, it's a little bit mundane the way it's presented online. So I'm more than happy to come in and have a conversation with anybody how to use that particular tool in a meaningful fashion.
Thanks, Chris. I love the idea that there's a real kind of metrics-driven benchmarking of that. So you can also see the success on the other end of making sure that you've put that together. And then when you act on it, did it move the needle, right? So that's a pretty good way to do it. Question, are there any quick and easy ways? I guess this is kind of good. Are there any quick and easy ways you advise for people to start with measuring customer satisfaction? I liked that idea of the complaints and compliments, and hopefully one has more than the other, but actually we learn more from the complaints. So maybe I don't hope that.
Quick and easy. You're on the phone with your customers. Ask them how you're doing. Okay. Not just, hey, we're going to be a little bit late. Can we move this deadline out 2 days? Hey, can we get you to authorize a change on this PO? Hey, this, hey, that. By the way, how are we doing? What's your experience been with this, year to date? Is there anything we can do better? Or you might ask something like, what one thing could our company do better that would help you in doing business with us? So just start with while you have them on the phone for any old conversation.
I love it. I love it. For those of you who knew Michael Black, who used to be at National Marker, he used to end every conversation exactly that way, even if it wasn't a customer, if you're a partner or whatever, he'd say, how could we have made this a better call? How could we have made this a better interaction? And so thank you, Chris, because I think this was so thought-provoking and lots of great ideas. And thank you, everybody who participated. We are asking you to tell us how we could do better. You'll be getting a link shortly from us to that customer satisfaction tool. And we look forward to hopefully helping you meet your goals using customer satisfaction and measuring it more accurately in the future. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody else.
Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you as well.